I do not see it live yet. Okay. I'll just stand by. Waiting. I was just looking, I'm like, wait a minute, there's 3 people. You didn't put your picture on there, Alex. On the... Yeah, I guess I... Oh, there it goes. I hear music. Hey, and let me know if you're getting feedback from me. Okay, cool. Oh no, now I'm hearing you. Now I'm hearing an echo. Crap. Let me... Okay, so I just...
Alex here with Duane from Dad Surviving Divorce and Mark Reel from A Father's Rights Lawyer. Actually, let's start off with Mark Reel. You're the new one on both of our channels right now, so go ahead, let the audience know a little bit about yourself, your page, what you do.
What's going on, guys? Thanks, Alex, for having me on. As you said, I am a father's rights lawyer. I am based out of Southern California. My law firm's name is Real Fathers Rights. On social media, I think most people probably know my face from the show I host on the Father's Rights Movement channel, State of the Family Courts. So you see me all over the place on that. So yeah, Southern California family law attorney, and also dabble in the media for the Father's Rights Movement right now.
I'll definitely have a few questions for you on that dual role. Let's go to Duane, Dad Surviving Divorce.
Hey, Alex, thanks for having me. Duane, I run Dad Surviving Divorce on YouTube, which is a support group for people, not just men, but men and women going through toxic, high conflict divorce, to help them deal with the stress and the emotional burdens of that, and to strengthen the relationship with their kids and minimize parental alienation.
So Eric Johnson of Utah Family Law TV might show up a little bit late, guys, but since Mark is here, I kind of wanted to jump into the first question, which was, how do you juggle being an attorney and a public figure on such a huge group too? It's a huge group.
I try not to juggle, to be completely honest. My background, I'm pretty open about it. I went to law school with no intention of being a lawyer. I was actually working in professional baseball when I went to law school. I thought I was going to be the next Theo Epstein. And I left law school and did not practice, did not touch anything to do with the law for 3 years. But I found myself in California family law courts, and I was absolutely amazed at what happens. And so that kind of inspired me to step back into the law and to found my firm that's specifically designed to help fathers. Mm-hmm. So I'm someone I'm pretty unapologetic about my stances and what I believe, because it's from personal experience, and it's all day, every day, dealing with clients who have to deal with this system and the way it operates. So I try to be myself, and I try not to juggle anything, not to pull any punches. So you know what you get. So I think that's the biggest thing for me, is just not juggling it.
You know, I don't know about you, Duane, but a lot of my viewers will say, hey, Alex, have you ever thought about going to law school? And I hear a lot about parents who go through these terrible situations, these terrible cases, thinking about going to law school. And I guess for you, it was backwards. You went to law school first, then you ended up in the child custody dispute. I can't imagine, I don't know, I guess I want to use the word power, what kind of power you had compared to the ordinary prompt person litigant. Did you represent yourself, or did you, how'd you go about your own custody case?
No. So, I would advise anyone, get a lawyer. They really do work, and they really do help if you get the right lawyer, and you get one that will do all the things that need to be done for you. I actually felt really powerless at first, because I stepped into the courtroom and I found out I was going to be father during my last semester of law school. And so I didn't know this world existed. I didn't know what a family law attorney did. I walked into that courtroom the first time as someone who was a law school graduate that had went through the character and fitness portion of the bar, had nothing more than a single speeding ticket on my entire record, thinking, oh, they're just going to do 50-50 custody. It's going to be fair. It's going to be quick. It's going to be easy. And I was quickly hit with a rude awakening that is not how this works.
I don't know. I kind of want to go over to Duane, see if he has a question for you.
Well, I just what your story with what you're talking about. I mean, I think that's what most people go through. They think, oh, okay, well, it's the law. It'll be fair. There won't be any games. I didn't do anything wrong. It's like, there's no issues here. So why should there be a problem? And like you said, I think all of us quickly realize that, oh my God, what I think is fair is nowhere near what the family law system thinks is fair. And it's just, how long did it take you to grasp how different or bizarre this whole thing was, and what adjustments did you make to try to protect yourself?
I would say it honestly and legitimately took me 2+ years. I mean,
Wow.
Despite having a legal background, despite kind of getting hit in the face early in this process, I always walked in there and I'm like, it's going to be fair. The judge is going to do what's right. The judge is going to make this okay. And it legitimately took me 2+ years to realize, like, hey, there are just certain situations, primarily men. It happens to both men and women, but primarily men, where you're just absolutely going to have to scratch and claw for every minute you have with your kids, every right that you have to parent your kids. But yeah, it was a solid 2 years before I was even able to kind of step back and realize that, wow, this is not what I expected. This is not what it puts itself out to be.
I don't know if you noticed this, but one of the things that I noticed is there are a lot of states coming out with statutes that are trying to deal with the issue of gender bias. And it seems to me, at least I have the impression that where these family courts still have discretion is where you typically still see the issue of fathers' rights coming up, or at least the issue of gender bias. For example, in Nevada, we have a lot of statutes now that deal with joint physical custody and the presumption and all that, but we don't have similar things in place, for example, for contempt of court. So you'll see issues where dads are usually taking harsher penalties than moms. Do you see the same issue yourself where the courts have discretion there?
Yeah, it's a tough issue to really dissect on how we could make it better, though, because there's always going to be a level of discretion. Yeah. You've seen last night, I actually just had an Arkansas attorney on my show, and they passed what is the strongest equal and shared parenting law in the country. It's not preponderance of the evidence. It's 50-50 beyond, or it's a 50-50. And to rebut that, it's clear and convincing evidence.
Wow, that's good.
So
that's awesome.
Arkansas this year became the second state. But there's so many factors that go into that. So just changing the law is not going to fix the problems. I have conversations with therapists and psychologists and different people involved in the system, and I point out the numbers to them that it's overwhelmingly the decisions they make favor mothers. And whether it be the ease they hand out domestic violence restraining orders against men, and it's clearly more difficult for a man to get that DVRO against a woman, or the kind of standard slap the every other weekend on the dad at the beginning, and it takes 4 years to go through the process, and it's like, well, they're in school now, this is what they're used to. There's a lot of actors in the system that I don't think they're bad people, and I don't think they do it intentionally, but it's one of those things that they have always done it that way. It's just the way things operate. And so it's not necessarily they set out to do that. It's so ingrained in how the system functions. Every cog in the wheel is just doing what they've always done, which, dating all the way back to the 50s and 60s, was rooted in sexist policy.
I can't agree with you more. I had no idea about the clear and convincing evidence standard being used in you said Arkansas, right?
Yeah, I think Brian, who I had on last night, he was one of the leaders in getting it passed. Monday, that actually goes into effect.
Oh, so that's new. That's
yes.
just happening.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
wow.
2021 was a big year for legislation. So a lot of people don't realize that. I mean, outside of really the state of Kentucky, who passed temporary presumption of 50-50 on temporary orders in 2017, and then for permanent orders in 2018, there really hasn't been much movement over the last 5 years. But just this year, I think it was 5 states passed better custody laws. Now, only Arkansas got that 50-50 presumption, but Tennessee, West Virginia, Texas, Oklahoma all passed laws that are getting us closer to that 50-50 presumption.
So once the laws get passed, then it's going to come down to, either the judges are going to comply or there's going to be a litany of appeals. I don't know how the situation's been in California, but 2019, 2020 in Nevada, at least half, if not 2/3 of the appeals going up on family court were reversing here. That was definitely a reckoning, I guess, for the family courts here. How do your appellate courts, step in California? I'm also curious about your Commission on Judicial Discipline. I've heard some pretty bad things.
So in terms of the appeals, I think nationwide the biggest issue with appealing family court decisions is the discretion that those superior court or trial court judges are given. Mm-hmm. The big wins in 4 of those states that passed new legislation was getting facts, findings, and conclusions of law. So now if the judge deviates from the standard, even a state like West Virginia, mm-hmm. if the judge, their new legislation that passed, if the judge grants one party less than 35% custody, mm-hmm. There has to be a written facts, findings, and conclusions of law. So that automatically is going to make things more appealable from an attorney's perspective, because the judge has to write down why they made the decision they made. It can't just be because it's mom. They're going to have to put something on paper. Mm-hmm. And as an attorney, that's going to automatically make things more appealable, because in family court, if you don't have that, it's abuse of discretion. Yeah. They either have to misapply the law, which happens all too frequently, or there has to be abuse of discretion, which, mm-hmm. You can probably count on your fingers and toes the number of times that you can actually prove that to an appellate court in a given decade even.
It's pretty tough. I like how you mentioned the part about them having to put together findings, because that was relatively recent here, and in fact that's where most of the reversals were coming from. They just weren't putting the findings in, so tons of decisions were being overturned, and now they seem to all have gotten on board. Isn't it? Do you think it's right that that's what it takes to lead to change in family court? That it takes reversals, and so many of them.
I think it's a I think, like I said, I don't think changing the laws mm-hmm. is going to fix the problem. Mm-hmm. It's a piece of the picture. Mm-hmm. I think that they're obviously the group that it's legislation, which is the group you hear the loudest. Yeah. There's also a growing number of individuals who believe that constitutional challenges of these statutes at the state level can create change. Is a statute on its face unconstitutional? It's an argument that hasn't really been made because it's because of the domestic relations exception. Mm-hmm. You can't really bring family issues into federal court. But there are a couple states now that there are challenges to their custody statutes on how they do temporary orders, how they do permanent orders, that challenge the constitutionality of them. And realistically, if we can get a couple of those states to end up in their state Supreme Courts and make their state Supreme Courts make decisions, it'd be something that's 2 or 3 years down the road, but it could lay out a roadmap to essentially get a family case heard by the Supreme Court. Because it's not just federal court that's going to lead there. If you get states that have different decisions about the constitutionality of similar statutes, the Supreme Court may be able to step in there.
I never thought about that. It always seems so out of reach. Over to Duane, see if you have a question. I have tons, but I'm fielding a lot of technical ones.
Now, what I wanted to ask is, like, especially for California, I mean, when I went through my situation, even though I had to fight for it to get 50-50, and this is 9 years ago, it seemed like there was a shift and things weren't as bad as they could have been. So since you've been doing this, what changes have you seen specifically in California that are promising, or maybe not, or maybe, going the wrong direction?
I think in general, I think a lot of my research, a lot of my readings, a lot of what I look into isn't necessarily California specific, but I think one thing is there are more and more progressive judges that are on the bench. Like having a conversation with a family law attorney out of Denver, Colorado, and they're like, yeah, shrooms are legal. So judges, like, if you bring up a drug issue, they just kind of have to shrug their shoulders. Yeah. Out here, it's weed. Yeah. So as you get more progressive judges, and this was something that another piece that I think could benefit changes, you get these older judges who have been on the bench forever that are always going to do things the way they've always done them. Mm-hmm. And the more, and I know, Alex, you do a lot of work in this space, the more we can either educate those people or get them off the bench. Yeah.
Encourage them to retire.
Someone more progressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's going to make a huge impact, and that's going to improve quality of life and the stresses that go with a custody fight. If you have a judge who is willing to actually apply the law and understand what they're doing at the superior court, trial court, whatever your state calls them. New York calls it their Supreme Court, which makes zero sense. If you get more judges at that level that are progressive and are willing to understand what the research says, you're going to save a lot of parents a lot of stress and a lot of issues.
I agree. And this is something that I didn't realize until somewhat recently, is that there are 2 judges that I can think of right now who, both through their conduct and through what I hear from insiders at the actual district, that do exactly what you said. They know what the law is, but they're just from a different time. And it's frustrating. Yeah. It's very heavy-handed to say that the way to fix the problem is to just fire them and replace them or wait for them to retire. But it does seem to be the thing that actually works is the new judges who come in are different. You're right. I'm noticing that here too. And it's like they understand the conflict. They understand because maybe it's something they haven't seen before. I feel like there was just kind of this arrangement before that, like you mentioned, moms just win and that's the end of it. And so a lot of the judges from before didn't see the conflict, and I think that the attorneys now that are taking the bench have litigated it, and they're just of a different perspective. And it does seem like judges can try to find ways around the statutes and exercise their discretion covertly, maybe not necessarily put to paper what they really want to do, but make it so that you really can't get that decision challenged on appeal. And if they have the wrong sort of motivations or I guess worldview on who should get custody and why, really you're kind of right that the law is probably not the strongest way to deal with the situation. I don't know. What do you think, Duane?
Oh man, I agree with you. I mean, it's going to take a bunch of different,
educating
pathways to start affecting change. Mm-hmm. I mean, the nice thing, I guess, I mean, none of this is nice, right? I mean, this is probably one of the worst experiences a human can go through. I mean, I get that there are worse things, but I mean, this is pretty devastating. But it's across the board. It's cultural. I mean, that's like what often, and actually I wanted to say this as you guys were talking, I was thinking that, and I'm sure Mark will agree with me on this, is that I think with what you guys were just talking about, this is why it's really important to get an attorney in your local area that understands this stuff and is good with it, who also understands how that court reacts. Because if you're going up against Judge Smith and Judge Smith is old school and, is going to just side with the mom, that's going to change your strategy, right? I mean, it's like you're either going to need to try to get that judge removed, or you're going to have to couch your arguments in a way that you might be able to get what you want, right?
That makes me want to ask, Mark, do you have the peremptory challenge of judge mechanism in California like we have in
Nevada?
Yes,
you get one peremptory challenge, and then you're stuck.
I see that smile. Do you use that a lot?
to be honest, I mean, I'm in a very progressive area. I mean, I will say there's some courthouses that I go to. I mean, I'm in Orange County, I'm in LA County, I'm in San Bernardino County, which are some of the bluest areas or the most progressive areas. Now, I mean, there are some smaller counties in, say, like, or smaller courthouses in like Riverside County that are very much more conservative. A lot of times you have to weigh it in those courthouses. Okay, is this person good enough? Because there's always the risk, because you only get one of those challenges, that you get stuck with someone who's even worse. So it's one of those things where you really have to weigh it out.
Yeah. I was curious. I mean, you pointed out how I do educate the public, especially, well, with this channel too, but especially with the other one. I had my first family court judge come on for an interview. It was a pretty big deal because it's not an election right now. And what do you think about electronic coverage of family court proceedings in California? I mean, your personal perspective and what you think the judiciary would do in response to efforts to attempt to provide electronic coverage of those cases.
I'm going to be honest. I probably within the community have a little bit of a controversial perspective on this one. I don't think it has anything to do with them being bad actors. I think it has everything to do what's a person's reaction when you shove a camera in their face.
They freak out.
Yeah. So I think it's less about having bad actors. They honestly think they're doing their best. And I think about in really every single state, if you're in a busy area, if you're in a highly populated area, you walk into a courthouse out here pre-COVID, and there may be 20 or 25 other cases that are going to be heard between 8:30 and lunch. And then the judge is going to sit through 4 hours of a trial in the afternoon. And they're going to do this 4 days a week. All of a sudden, they've heard ballpark 100 to 120 cases in 1 week. And they may see you for 15 minutes every 3 to 6 months.
Right.
So they're really given an impossible job. And I'm not saying that they do a great job of it. There are more than we would like to admit good judges, and it's becoming increasingly more common to have good judges. But at the end of the day, the way the system's set up, a judge is a regular person.
Yeah.
Like, I know when you walk into a courtroom for that first time, the guy or gal sitting up there in the funny dress with their mallet banging on the table, it can be intimidating, and you want to think they have some like higher power, but they're just an average person. Like, yeah, they went to law school. They probably practiced law for 15, 20, 25 years. And a lot of times, maybe this is their retirement job, or this was like the next step. They stepped out of private practice to go on the bench, but they don't have some superpower to be able to recall everything you've said when you're in front of them for 15 minutes every 3 months. You see them for a total of an hour a year, and they see hundreds, thousands of other cases. It's an impossible gig.
I mean, there was a huge push here to create a bunch of departments trying to recognize the problem. You're right. There's some, I've noticed that the error rates in districts with less population are way lower, and the error rates in the districts like District 8, which is Vegas, are higher. And I think it's exactly what you say. It's an impossible job. Way too many cases, not enough time. I don't know. We put you on the hot seat, Mark, and this wasn't really supposed to be you taking all the questions. Why don't you? Would you have anything for Duane or I?
No, I'm good. I'm here to answer. Like I said, I don't pull any punches. I mean, I am who I am.
Yeah.
I haven't pissed too many people off yet. I'm sure I'll piss more. Well, I don't know. I'm about to have to stop reading my DMs. But I haven't pissed enough important people off that I'm going to keep right on talking and telling my opinions.
Yeah.
I do have a question. So just because you might have a unique perspective on this, Mark, are you seeing a decline in, the stereotypical silver bullet false allegation use, or is that still happening as often as it was in the past?
I don't know. I mean, to be very candid, I mean, relatively, I'm new on this scene. So I think that, 2017 was when my own case started. So I don't want to sit here and act like I've been around the block and I've been in courtrooms for the last 15 years and seen the trends on that macro level. But I mean, I think that from what I've seen, California, we have one of the worst domestic violence laws in the country. Family Code Section 3044, which if you're found by preponderance of the evidence to have perpetuated domestic violence, there's a presumption that you should not have joint or sole legal or physical custody for 5 years.
Wow.
So it's without a doubt, it was one of the laws that got ran through when the Violence Against Women Act became a thing. Actually, the Bar Association out here fought against it, but it's easy for legislators to vote for strong domestic violence laws, even if the consequences or what it causes is a net negative.
Well, but I mean, what I would say on that, here's the problem, though, I think, is people don't think that people lie, right? So if you take it as true, if somebody does have that problem, forcing, like, not completely erasing them out of their kid's life, but forcing this 5-year thing, you could easily say, oh, well, that gives them the time to get the help that they need. And obviously, the other parent is going to want to be, is going to be actively involved and encouraging this to happen. And as they see progress, they're going to let them see the kids. And I don't think these people understand that you got vindictive people who manipulate the system. And now you have somebody who had no history of domestic violence, who gets goat roped into this situation. And, now all these delays get put in. And then even what you just said, I'm assuming at the 5-year mark, that doesn't mean it magically goes away. It means now at 5 years, you can go hire another attorney, go back to court and spend the 6 months to 18 months to try to fight it, to say, hey, look, I'm better now, or things have changed, or these are the things I've done. And now I want to be more involved in my child's life, right?
Yeah, I mean, they can go back. If it's a 2-year, a 3-year, a 5-year, the protected party can go back and ask for an extension. And
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, and there are states, Missouri, I believe it was, that ran through right at the end of their legislative session, where now they allow lifetime restraining orders. They obviously don't have the section of the family code that California has, but once again, it goes back to it's easy in the court of public opinion for legislators to vote for stricter domestic violence laws, more protections for the abused, which domestic violence is a serious issue.
It is.
But I don't know if the legislators have the foresight that say, like, the Supreme Court, when they make a ruling, it's not what's right then and there. They have to look at, in this decision, what's it going to cause in the future. And I don't think legislators necessarily have that foresight when they vote for these laws.
Well, even when it's pointed out to them, they don't even fix it. I don't know if you know, but there's a case named after me, Falcone versus Secretary of State. I filed a petition for the mandamus and it published, and it's on this issue. The legislature, by the way, we have the same statute that you mentioned here, but it's by clear and convincing evidence, not preponderance here. Anyway, that's what happened in my case. Is my ex's attorney exploited a loophole, not with the restraining order process, but with the confidential address program for victims of domestic violence. And so I filed a writ petition. It published, and the legislature still hasn't fixed it. So the only way a parent can challenge the program is to follow the procedure in the case, which says they have to file an extraordinary petition for writ of mandamus, which is just weird. So I've sent emails and stuff to the legislators that they might want to just fix the statute. It's probably a lot easier to do that for people, but they haven't. So even sometimes you'll tell them, even with the Supreme Court's perspective on it, and they still won't fix it. They just leave it.
So here's the thing too, back to this kind of the state of the silver bullet or domestic violence allegations in family court. This will really tell you all you need to know. I would probably say 75 to 80% of my clients have either been accused of domestic violence or currently have a domestic violence restraining order against them.
Wow.
And I have conversations on a daily basis where a man has clear evidence that there is abuse occurring, physical, mental, whatever it may be, and they are too scared to pull the trigger to file that document. There's a level of maybe it's male biology, and even though you and your partner aren't seeing eye to eye, there's still a level of protection. But women have no problem pulling that trigger, pulling that lever. And here in California, the first conversation I have with every single client, I have to warn them, every single thing you say, one mean text message can get you a domestic violence restraining order out here. Like I tell them, like, you want to hear about mean text domestic violence restraining orders? And they're like, what do you mean? I never hit her. I was like, doesn't matter. I've seen it. I have seen it where a restraining order was granted because the dad said, I will fight to the end to be in my child's life.
Oh man.
And he got a restraining order granted against. No contact for 2 years, went back, the same judge extended it for another 3 years.
I can think of one person that I personally know that went through that too. Go ahead, Duane. You had a question.
No,
It's true. I think they just don't realize. They don't realize they don't need evidence of you actually having done it. They can just show the text message and be like, "Look, he's mean."
This is why our channels are so freaking important. I had a client the other day, a coaching call, and as it started, he was just like, you saved me because all the mistakes I would have made, you've warned me about, so I didn't make them. So he's been able to get 50-50 custody and he's in Florida, but that's the problem with this. It's like, you get up you're basically in a war. You don't even realize it. You don't even realize that when you get angry and you send that text message that you may have just torpedoed yourself. I mean, that is just, and the question I was going to ask you, Mark, as you were talking about that before you hit my trigger point was of those, you said 70% of your clients are dealing with that. How many of those are getting, not substantiated, but just like, okay, this is BS, that we're not even talking about that?
I have been told anecdotally by an individual who we'll call it, we're working towards creating change out here, that 70% of domestic violence restraining order requests come back unfounded in family court. I don't have the statistics. That's another major issue with family court is when there's a minor child involved, everything gets sealed.
Yep.
I would love to see the balls and strikes from these judges. Like, what's the average custody split from some of these judges? But everything gets sealed, so I don't think you actually will have accurate numbers.
No, what I want to just touch on for a moment, though, and I have no idea. I have no idea on the data, but the fact that you're saying it looks like it's 70% are unfounded, because I think a lot of times when a person gets stuck in I do have people on my channel, women who've accidentally got into the machine on the wrong side of it and are fighting for time with their kids. But I think when people realize, hey, just because someone says you're a monster and it's going through the process, take a breath, relax, have a good attorney, make sure you don't make any mistakes that substantiate what the allegations are, and you're probably going to be okay. And for the most part, for my folks on my channel, and it's taken, some people are in other countries, it's taken almost a year for the courts to finally say, wait a minute, this doesn't even make sense, and kick it out. But I just wanted to hit that because I think it's really important that people understand it, because so many people, I think, walk into this system and they think, oh my God, I'm going to lose everything. And that is I guess I want to be careful how I say it, but that's a spiral that will send you into a dark direction that you may not be able to get out of.
You get two types of people that walk in. There are two types of people that walk into my office. They're the people that have no idea about what they're walking into, and they're happy-go-lucky. They're good human beings. They are so excited to be a father. Mm-hmm. And then there are the people who the first thing they say is, how bad is it going to be? Am I going to get to see my kids? Yeah. And I think I honestly, I live in obviously a very, very diverse area of the country. There's a huge shift even demographically between, say, the African-American community, the Hispanic community, white, Asian. Those are the four primary out here on what those individuals will say, what their beliefs will be when they walk into my office. Like I honestly, and I would honestly say that if a Hispanic man walks into my office and the first conversation I have is like, how many has her mom, her auntie, her cousin, her best friend, how many of them have told you that mom knows best, you can't take the child away from their mom? And every single one of them will say yes, because that's so ingrained in that culture. and it's sad. And I mean, there's even statistics that show that like men of color are 3 times as likely to lose all custodial rights. And I think a lot of it has to do with the cultural beliefs from the get-go, from the start. They don't feel worthy because everyone in their family, everyone in her family is telling them, if you do this, you're harming the child.
Wow. And that was what I was about to ask, is it's not even imposed on them. They just consent to it.
Yeah, 100%. I would say that that in terms of like, and I say this, and a lot of my thought process behind it. I have 3.5-year-old twins, and they are. I have a son and a daughter. So my son is 1/4 black, 1/4 Hispanic, and then half white. And in looking at what would he maybe have to deal with? What's he going to hear from his other side of the family when it comes to issues like this? Like one of the saddest things that I run into, I will say, the stereotype or whatever you want to call it around, say, like the African American community. If a black man walks into my office, they, I think, are more likely to have not done anything because they're told they can't do anything.
Yeah. So,
and then it's like opposite, like the Asian culture, they come in guns blazing, like they believe in them. So like they don't have, there's not that cultural issue. Mm-hmm. So I really think, like, that's why I say, like, changing the laws, changing the judges, getting some having these constitutional challenges, that's part of it. But part of the issue is
culture,
societal beliefs. Because if this is as common as I believe it is, it's toxic at the beginning of the process for a lot of guys. And it's like, you don't do anything for 2 or 3 years, and then you're like, oh, I actually have rights. When you run into a father's rights Facebook group, or you run into one of you guys' channels, it's like, that's a very uphill battle to fight if you've been 4 years of essentially relinquishing all of your rights.
Yeah, it's very typical. One of the things I tell my viewers is the legal system is not conducive to you saying, oh, I didn't know, I need to go and do my research now that I lost. It's like, you have to have done it before you even started, it's one of the biggest problems. Go ahead, Duane.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think from a society perspective, I mean, even in my situation, I mean, it's like, typically men are geared to think, mom's the primary care. I mean, let me back up. What I'm trying to say is, when my thing started, I was like, okay, you know what, full custody. I mean, whatever. She had primary care. Okay, fine. Not that big of a deal. Then when I started hearing about wanting to leave the state, and then the false allegations started coming in, and I'm like, holy crap, I'm in the fight for my life. And if I don't freaking get everything I can up front, I'm hosed. And I've told a lot of people, it's like, you have to win everything up front. Mm-hmm. And if you have, like Mark, you were talking about it, if you 2 years into it go in and say, hey, I want to change now, well, you have 2 years of precedent that you were quote unquote okay with it because you didn't say anything, and you have a major uphill battle to try to change things.
How's California on enforcement of parents who withhold children, court orders, stuff like that? I'm just curious.
Who's withholding them, a mom or a dad?
Oh, nice. That answers seriously, though.
That's sad, but that's a good point.
I can't share too much. Mm-hmm. But I will say that I have seen legitimate situations where mom has 0 legal or physical custody. Dad has 100% legal decision-making and 100% physical. And mom has some like limited visitation. Number one is that they usually get the benefit of the doubt in terms of ramping up their time. Doesn't matter if they skip supervised visits, doesn't matter if they don't exercise all their parenting time. And another toxic piece of this system is the way law enforcement reacts to these situations. So if a dad's doing it, number one is, I don't have a single client right now that in their heart of hearts is willing to withhold their child. Even in instances of serious domestic violence, they refuse to file for a DVRO, and they refuse to remove the child from the situation because she's not a bad mom. Yeah. But the minute a dad does that, which is very rare, their door gets kicked down.
Yep.
Mom, who has no legal or physical custody, does it, and the DA, the courts don't grant an ex parte hearing. The police department looks at you super confused because, wait, dad has full custody.
Yeah.
And the DA's office is asking for all these forms and everything else that they need to do anything. Well, there's technically a kidnapping that in some instances is across state lines, and like we're talking like legitimate federal crimes, and the police just stand there with a confused look on their face.
Yeah. That's an issue.
The other piece too is the other piece that drives me insane are law enforcement officers, and I support you protect communities, you do everything to keep us safe on a daily basis. But one thing we got to stop is, like I said, I don't have a single client who's willing to withhold their kid from the mother. Mm-hmm. Men just like it's literally wired in. It happens, it does, but it's extremely rare compared to a woman withholding child from man.
Yeah.
And what law enforcement a lot of times goes in and does is, if there's not a court order in place yet, hey mom, you shouldn't let him see him, you shouldn't let him take him because there's no court order and he might keep him.
Yep.
So you're advising you're advising the mom to withhold the child because there is a possibility that statistically is tiny compared to mom withholding child that could occur.
Yeah. That was excellent answer. It's an issue here too, probably, and so it just goes back to what you were talking about with the culture and society accepting these gender biases.
Well, and one thing I just want to add in on that, I was just talking to someone about this the other day, is we've established a system that there's no consequences typically in that situation for, and I'll say it to be, I guess, less gender whatever, because it's typically if you're a toxic narcissistic person who probably has a personality disorder, they have, man to woman, they have a unique ability to be able to manipulate the family court system. And it seems like people like that they have nothing to lose, right? I mean, it's like the situation, Mark, you were talking about when it starts out. It's like, look, hold the kids, make sure you have as much time as possible and make the other person claw away because, hey, if he makes if they make a mistake, great. You might win 80% or 90% or, full custody. And worst case, you're not going to be, penalized for it. And if they turn around and say, yeah, okay, this was all just being exaggerated, it seems like they'll look at the other person as like, oh, well, you were just being, overly cautious and you were just trying to make sure, err on the side of caution to protect your child so there's no consequences. There needs to be consequences, right? When someone makes up some false allegation or plays games with withholding the kids or does something like that, there needs to be a consequence so that you don't have bad attorneys advising their clients saying, hey, look, has he ever, or have they ever yelled at you? Mm-hmm. Have they ever grabbed your arm? Like when you were falling, did they grab your arm to make sure you didn't bash your head? And then say, okay, well, that's abuse and let's run with it and spin a false narrative on a basis of maybe a little bit of skewed reality because what do they got to lose? Shoot, my ex did that. I mean, $30,000 down the toilet just to get what we did before, because had she won, she would have been in a different state and never had to deal with me and had all my cash.
Think about it. There are states that have laws like that on the books. Off the top of my head, I know Illinois has a rather recent addition to their family code that deals with if you impact the other party's parenting time. Yeah. But it goes back to that enforcement piece. And it goes back to a lot of times the catch-22 of showing that you're following the order. So for example, let's say that mom's not following the order and dad continues to show up at her house for pickup. All of a sudden he's at risk despite him following the order of ending up in a domestic violence accusation situation, even though
you're stalking me.
He's supposed to be.
Right. He's always showing up at my house.
One of the comments, there's a bunch of comments. No, it's all right. There's a bunch of comments.
Hey, I just want to jump in just because I had a super chat, or I had a couple of super chats.
Go ahead.
Tiffany, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. And the other one I'll have to look up and recognize here in a minute because it scrolled off.
This comment in particular is insightful from Erica S. She says to Mark Reel in response, she says, judges try not to make anyone the bad guy because they think it will increase conflict, but it's the opposite. And then I'm going to add a little bit to that myself. I just want
That
to
is so
personally
true.
say, sometimes there is a bad guy though, and sometimes they do have to do something about it. But I think she's right. Yeah, I don't know.
I think you think about family law. I think there is a lot of times good guy, bad guy in the cases, and I mean, I'm always on one side of it. I like I said, 100% male client base, but I think that we have to also realize that a lot of most of family law is he said, she said. We're talking about things that happen in the confines of a couple's home, and so, despite what we may believe to be fact, we operate in gray area. And realistically, there's his story, her story, and then there's the truth somewhere out there. And that's the challenge of really anything in family law court is the credibility. That's the biggest thing if you go to trial, if you go to a hearing, is the credibility in your story, because it is almost exclusively he said, she said.
So I'm actually short on time. Duane, do you want to stay on with Mark? I can keep your stream alive if you'd like.
Sorry, I just muted myself.
It's your call.
Yeah, buddy. I mean, I had it scheduled until 7.
I'm going to tell my viewers, if you guys want to continue with Mark and Duane, just switch over to DSD. I'll keep his stream alive and I'll terminate my own. Sorry about that.
How just to throw it out there, how am I going to kill this stream whenever?
Oh, just over? On your own. You just hit the button, and YouTube will cut it. You don't have to worry about this stuff I'm using.
Okay. All right. We'll see how this goes.
No worries. Bye, guys.
So, hey, Mark, I had somebody, you kind of were just addressing this, but somebody had asked the question on my chat, has there been any issues of serial perjury being addressed by a judge where, and you were kind of talking about that, we were kind of just talking about the lack of consequences, but do you see any changes of that where someone's saying, hey, look, you are lying, you can't lie, and it seems like you can lie in family court. Do you see any changes in that?
Yeah, call up your local district attorney's office and ask them the last time they prosecuted perjury in family court.
Yeah, never, right?
Yeah. So I actually had, I'll say this, I actually had an attorney propose a very unique idea around that. Because it's so prevalent, the DAs aren't going to touch it. And because, once again, you're operating in that gray area, there are obviously some just blatant lies, but at the end of the day, you are operating in a gray area a lot of times. But he floated the idea of, what if you allowed opposing counsel to prosecute perjury? So to attach some sort of penalties to it. Yeah. For example, if they prosecute perjury, it's X amount financial penalty, plus you have to pay the legal fees to prosecute it. And would that be something that would be enough of a deterrent? He also said, would it be one of those things where attorneys would be unwilling to go at other attorneys?
Well, I think, man, there just has to be some consequence, because, right, I mean, if that existed, then I imagine the conversation that an attorney would have with their client would be different, right? I mean, because I think now correct me if I know you're a men's attorney, so you probably don't deal with this, but I would imagine a lot of attorneys, when their client walks in and says, oh my God, my ex is a monster and is abusive, they just say, okay, all right, I'll believe that. All right. So you're saying they did this and this. And I don't know how much pushback there really is, but I mean, if there was if somebody came in and they're like, oh, they're this and that, and then have some type of sanity. I mean, for instance, what I'll mention, and this kind of freaked me out in my situation, is, these crazy allegations were coming up. I mean, I'm a professional. I work in an industry that your reputation is, if there's a problem with it, it could affect your career. You have these reviews every 5 to 7 years, depending on what level you're at, where they do a deep dive on your background. And when these things were happening, I'm like, holy crap. This is a threat, this is threatening everything. And fortunately, I had an attorney who said, well, look, she's saying that you're a monster and you beat your kids. And we think that and she's worried that you're going to kill them or the kids, but she's okay with you taking the kids to school every day. And she's okay with you on having unsupervised time with the kids. So she's undermining her own argument. Right. I mean, I think if there was consequences, maybe that attorney would have said, hey, really? Really? Are you really going to put that on paper?
Yeah, I think so. The first piece I always go to on this is this right here. So I worked in professional sports. I worked in collegiate sports. I worked in the fitness industry. I can tell you without a doubt, the most competitive environment that I was ever in was law school.
Wow.
So you're putting all of these very competitive, relatively high achievers, and you're pitting them head to head. I think that's the product that's creating. I do believe that a lot of attorneys will fish for domestic violence or substance abuse or different things like that, and they cause these issues. But I think the root of it is, at the end of the day, you're pitting most likely two extremely competitive human beings face to face, and there's a winner and there's a loser. I hate the idea of winners and losers in family court, but I really believe that any attorney that doesn't view it that way, that doesn't walk into a hearing with this is a winning outcome, this is a losing outcome, is lying.
Yeah, I hear you on that one. I remember at one point I had a conversation with my attorney. I was in the office to have a meeting or something, and he was getting out of his car, and I'm like, rough day. And he goes, yeah, well, he goes, if both sides are unhappy, it's a good day, I mean, and it's just such a, God, even just thinking that makes my eye twitch. I mean, it's such a screwed up system, I mean, and the sad part about it is that even if you get to the other, I mean, once you get to the other side of it, if let's say you're not dealing with somebody that's really toxic and vindictive or whatever, there's so much damage. It's like hard to come back from it. It's like you get into a situation where so much crap has just been strung all over the place. And then you expect these parents to come together for the best interest of their kid. I mean, I know sometimes it does happen. There.
That's the issue. Best interest of the child.
Yeah.
Number one is, what does that mean? Right. I tell people it's not a legal standard by any means.
Right.
It's an excuse. It's an excuse that can be used. I did it because that was in the best interest of the child.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, we were talking about that earlier, right? I mean, it's like at the end of the day, you could say, oh, well, there was this time, I mean, just being sarcastic, but, there was this time my ex, when she was younger, did a little bit of drug use. Well, maybe she's doing drugs now, and I'm worried about the kid, I mean, and I know I'm being hyperbolic, but I mean, but that's, I think the problem with it is then you turn around, you're like, oh, well, I was just being, I was just concerned. I just wanted to make sure my kids were safe.
Well, I think both parties at the end of the day know a lot of that stuff is complete bullshit. Like I honestly, like both parties at the end of the day know they're spewing all of this and it's not true. But that's the saddest part about it is I think that I would say the vast majority of men who, when they initially walk in my office to file for divorce, or which is it's a minority. Most of the time it is the woman who takes the first action, takes the first step. Yep. But those men who are taking the first step, they're like, oh, we're going to do this cordially. Like, we're going to figure it out. And then a week later, she's telling them, I want half your retirement, move out of the house. I'm going to sell the house. I'm going to take all the proceeds from the house. And then I'm going to need, you make $6,000 a month. So I'm going to need $8,000 a month in spouse support and child support.
And then they're shell shocked and they come back in your office like, oh my God, what just happened? Right.
Yeah. And it's like, they'll demand, they'll request, they'll be like, hey, I want to be like as friendly as possible in this initial filing. Like, we're both good parents. We're going to do this. And then, I mean, hey, sometimes it does work. And other times that next conversation after the wife or the girlfriend responds is just, they just got punched between the eyes.
It's, I mean, I can see going in saying, hey, hope for the best, expect the worst. But whenever you're not anticipating it and you get that sucker punch, that's, I think, and then the problem with that is I think that's what's like the catalyst for a DV issue, because you get angry and then you respond and then they use that to say, oh my God, now I'm scared. I'm just asking. I mean, like the entitled word, right? I'm just asking for what I'm entitled to. That used to really irritate me. Doesn't bother me anymore.
Fair doesn't mean anything when you don't see eye to eye with the person.
Oh,
I mean, it's really a pointless word. But here's something I see that, like I said, domestic violence, serious issue.
Absolutely.
both mental and physical domestic violence, extremely
Definitely
serious issue.
Yep.
But why aren't there more cases in family law court that start? So in California, you can start one of 4 ways: child custody, divorce, domestic violence, or child support.
Right.
There's 4 ways to start your case. Why are, if domestic violence is so prevalent, is so common, why are more cases not started via the domestic violence route? A lot of times it's child custody, it's divorce, and then 2, 4, 6, 12 months down the road, all of a sudden domestic violence allegations come out. If they were that prevalent and that serious, at least in the state of California, why are more cases not started that way?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's all boils down to, it's a strategic move, right? I mean, if you're able to paint the other person to where it limits time, then you get the resources, the money, the time, you get all of it.
I mean, here's the thing in California, it's you file for a domestic violence restraining order. And I don't want to say no cases start with a DV filing, but I mean, the vast majority are divorce or child custody.
Yeah.
Domestic violence is probably the 4th most common starter of cases. But if you look at it, it's one of those things where in California, if you file and you file for domestic violence restraining order during your case, and let's say you file for it 5 days before you're supposed to go for a hearing that temporary orders are going to be given, all of a sudden it's like they have 21 days to set a DV hearing. But that initial DV hearing is just on the morning call. So it's not set up to be a full on trial.
Right.
So you walk in there on that first one and okay, you can either take your chances. You've been able to do minimal discovery, maybe a deposition, but you've been able to do no discovery. You know nothing other than what they've put on the piece of paper, which a lot of times is filed without an attorney, with someone coaching them on how to do it and how to get it granted. And the kids have been taken away. I've seen instances where like mom wasn't living in the home, and she just out of the blue one day filed a domestic violence restraining order during a custody case and moved back into the home with the kids. And dad had to go find somewhere else. And it was like 6 or 8 months on his own with the kids in the house. Mom comes back, her name's still on the lease, doesn't come back, files the DVRO. The police come remove him. She moves right back in and sleeps in the same bed he's been sleeping in by himself for 6 months.
It's just so wrong. So it's such an abuse of the system.
Well,
I just want to, let me
kids
just do this
get
real
taken away.
quick. I just want to say to Achilles' Last Stand, thanks so much for the super chat. It says family court is a racket. I was literally crucified for 2 years on baseless claims with no evidence or proof whatsoever.
Happens. That's the sad part. It's like, if you want that in California, there are times where if you want that full long form hearing for the DV issue, then you have to ask for it at that initial hearing. You've already went 15, 20 days without seeing your child. It's probably the first time you've ever been away from your child for that long. And it may get set 2 or 3 months out. If you need 2 days, it may get set 3, 4, 5 months out. I've seen trials that are 1 day get set 12 months out.
I've talked to a lot of people. It hasn't come up recently because I've made a lot of videos on it, but just people get caught up in that goat rope, and they're so desperate to see their kids that they agree to some timeshare or custody arrangement that is just horrible. And I haven't had to deal with it in a while, but I know in the past when it would come up, I'm like, do not agree to that. Fight the fight. It's going to take a little bit longer. You might not see your kids for a few months, but you make a bad decision and you could potentially be stuck with that for a decade. You have to really be careful.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think the men that I talk to that come into my office, that I get on Zooms with, that I get on phone calls with, that are the most distraught are not the guys who haven't seen their kids in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, but the guys who it's been 18 days since I've seen my kids. it's been 31 days since I've seen my kids. So there's this period where it's obviously you're in shock. Most of these guys were the type of guys who came into the system happy-go-lucky. I'm a good dude. I'm a good dad.
Nothing to worry about.
Fair shake.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden they get slapped with this. Well, how can I see my kid? Like, the hearing's not for another 3 weeks. How can I see him? I'm like, you can't.
Yeah, you can't.
You can't. I mean, unless she agrees to something, which she's probably not, you can't. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, I would imagine you've had some pretty distraught men in your office who are looking at that going, but I'm not a bad guy. I mean, I love my kids. I've been involved in their lives every day. What do you mean I can't see my kid? Right? I'm sure you've had those conversations.
I mean, it goes back to the first conversation I have with guys is about domestic violence restraining orders and what it means in the state of California, and that they're common. And you don't know, there's no way to predict where they're going to happen. And so you have to watch everything you say. You have to watch everything you do. You have to document everything, and you have to be uncomfortably pleasant to your co-parent. Or you could find yourself in that situation. And if you find yourself in that situation, there's no safety plug I can pull that is going to put the kids back in your life tomorrow. It's going to be at least a couple weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the sad part is you're not their therapist. And I would imagine they're calling you all the time, trying to like, what do we do now? What do we do now? And it's like, you got to let it play out. Right. That's
that's another piece that I always tell guys. I'm like, hey, you can text me like, hey, my phone's on. It's probably on me. You're going to get a response within a couple hours, even if it's Saturday or Sunday, or it's midnight. But even before there are any issues, go find yourself a therapist, or at minimum, you need to have a conversation with your closest confidant, and you need to tell them, I'm going to share you all the gory details. I might cry. I'm going to be emotional, but I just need you to be there whenever I need to just spill my guts.
Yeah. I think you're the first option you put, it was a therapist. And then I would say the second thing is, unless you really have a confidant that really understands it, find like my channel, or find some other community of people. I don't know if Facebook's really the right word right area, because that seems to be pretty negative. Hey, I do have do you got a couple of minutes, or do you need to run?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So I had a couple more super chats. One's, I think, just a comment. One's kind of a question. So first one is from Achilles Last Stand. It says, you have constitutional rights, expectations, and protection in every other court except family court, which is really true, unfortunately. I think so. Do you agree?
Yes, I think that I took a breath there. So you technically still have those constitutional protections, but because of the way the laws have developed, some of those things have morphed. Like I said earlier, I think one of the ways to deconstruct the system and create a more positive system is going to be through challenging the constitutionality. In family law court, there's a shot clock. It's 18 years and you're out. So it's not like other areas of law where people are at it for 40, 50 years. If you're in business, you're going to be involved in lawsuits. If you work for one of the big oil companies, like, they're fighting off the same lawsuits year after year. Yeah. If you're working the bank, you work for if you're in the corporate legal department at a bank, you're protecting certain laws, you're protecting certain precedents in court year after year. In family law court, people come and go. It's 18 years and you're out. And your kids are adults, and that kind of chapter has passed through. So you don't have a lot of people who are in it and have the ability to create change, at least how your constitutional rights are protected.
You kind of hit on something I just want to, I guess, comment on, is that I think a lot of people, once you get ground through the machine, once you find your stalemate or whatever, you get tired of dealing with it. Right. And then when the kids do get older, it's like the last thing you want to do is think about, for a lot of people, the last thing you want to do is rethink about what you went through. You just want to live your life. I think that's part of the other problem. It's kind of what you just said, is that, people get so burned out through this whole thing. There's just not a lot of people to come back and say, okay, you know what, this was really messed up. I need to still champion for change. because now you're trying to be in your grandkids' lives, right? I mean, you're dealing with a completely different scenario, and it's like, do you really want to spend more time on that?
I can think of one person off the top of my head that does not have young children that has been in the movement and in the fight for more than 20 years. Like,
who's that?
That's it. Don Hubin, National Parents Organization. He's been at it since the late 90s. And obviously a great resource for a lot of us. But I mean, yeah, it's one of those things where if you look at the leaders of all the organizations, and I'm lucky enough to have conversations with a lot of these people, it's like, I mean, from Casey Sowers at the Father's Rights Movement, he has young kids. Mark Ludwig, Americans for Equal and Shared Parenting, he has kids. And really you go on and on down the list. And even the people that are getting this legislation passed, I look at the state of Texas, and a lot of people I know that were very active. They weren't the same people that were making the pushes for the change 7-10 years ago. It's a lot of new faces. So there's one. It's one of those things where it's because of the nature of it, and because, like you said, you get so burnt out. It's such a personal, stressful time that. A lot of the you kind of are you're a firecracker in this movement. Like you burn bright, but you don't burn for very long. There's not a lot of bonfires that push things forward.
Yeah, I on that, I mean, I've been doing my channel I just broke 5 years a few months ago. And I think one of the things that keeps me going on this is every once in a while I'll get an email. Actually, there was even some comments in the stream tonight just saying, you've saved my life, right? I mean, I found you at the darkest point in my life, and you were able to help me see a pathway through this and get out. And I remember when I was going through it, I didn't have anybody who was really doing that. And that was kind of my driver for it. But honestly, I mean, if I wasn't getting that type of feedback, this is a draining topic.
I think you made a really good point there, though. I think social media has changed some of that dynamic. You mentioned how toxic some of the Facebook groups and stuff can be. And I would say that's probably where the majority of my mean DMs come from is the Facebook community. But YouTube, Facebook, there are so many positive platforms now where men can gather. Like, I mean,
and not feel alone.
I mean, you have your channel, you have there's Dad Talk Today, Chris Cole with We the Parents podcast. The Father's Rights Movement's really turned a chapter and become very positive. There are so many positive communities that you can find out there now.
That's awesome. That is, and Dad Talk Today, I every once in a while I'll do collabs with Eric. That guy's phenomenal, what he's pulling off and able to do so far. I'm very happy with that. Hey, I do have another comment from another super chat. This comes from Valkyrie. It says there, and I think I know the answer, but I'll ask it anyways. Is there anything you can file if the domestic violence happened more than 4 years ago and you have children and are sharing custody?
It depends on the state you're in.
Really? I figured the answer would be no. So really you could actually say.
I'm not aware of any, but when you ask specific technical questions about family law, all the family codes are constructed differently. So my guess though is if you tried to say, hey, 4 years ago there was domestic violence, the question I could just see the next question being, and where's the evidence in the last 4 years? Where's the pattern, right? It's weaker, especially in a family law context. It's going to be very weak. I mean, I've seen crazier ones than that, where it's he dragged me 40 years ago. He dragged me by my hair across the floor. I have seen that in a filing. It's not funny, but it's just, it reminded me at one point, I had a therapy or a therapy session for one of our kids, and this is like a few years after the divorce, and the ex, asked, can our child leave? And they put him out the room. And then she made some comment. She's like, what it was like, 18, however many years ago, it was like before we met, it's like, this time frame, he did this. And I remember just looking at her, I'm like, wait a minute, you're bringing up something that you didn't even know me. We weren't even physically together.
you only know about this because I mentioned it to you and you're bringing that up. It's like, how does that have any relevance on this?
Yeah, so I mean, it would be weaker. And like, I mean, but in a criminal context, there's going to be statute of limitations,
Right.
and different things like that. But yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of any states that would absolutely bar that.
Oh, you know what?
Admissible testimony.
I see what you're saying, because I was just assuming it was family court, and she didn't ask it in the context of that. I mean, I guess it's saying, hey, if I was a victim of domestic violence 4 years ago, I guess the thing is then go talk to the DA, right? Or go talk to law enforcement, right?
Yeah. And I mean, there are definitely, I mean, out here, like a 3-year statute of limitations.
Okay.
Yeah. So family court, there's a 2-year statute of limitations, and most criminal stuff, not all, it's 3 years. So that type of stuff would apply, but I'm not aware of any states that would absolutely bar what would be considered admissible testimony about any domestic issues.
Well, and I think part of the problem with family court is that's the go-to that everyone says, right? I mean, what I advise people with is, your credibility is your best asset. So don't squander it with playing, certain games. I mean, you want to go in and you want, if at all possible, for the judge to be able to look at you and say, okay, this guy or this person has credibility, and the other person is being unreasonable. Because as soon as you both look unreasonable, you're both going to get painted with that brush, and you're not helping yourself.
Yeah, that's why I tell clients all the time, especially when they're the one responding, or they've just gotten hit in the face with one of those, one of the responses where all these loose allegations come out, is like, we have to play factual and we have to play with positivity. We can't necessarily stoop down. We may have to address some of that stuff, but
there's a way to do it that's constructive, right? That's the thing.
Yeah. I mean, in a hearing situation, or like if I'm talking to a client and he has all these negative things to say at a trial about his ex, I'm probably going to say, well, how can we get her to say those things? Because I want you to be sunshine and rainbows, and then she's doom and gloom.
Man, I love the way you just said that. I mean, it's the simplicity of it and the power of it is really profound. And I'm going to imagine you've seen success with that. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't say that it always wins. It always works. I don't think anything is definitive in family court, because there is so much discretion. There is so much gray area. But I think that ultimately you come out feeling better about yourself, no matter the outcome. If I always use sports analogies, if you played the game the right way, if you went in there and you truly looked at it through the lens of what was best for your kids, and you highlighted positive instead of playing around in the mud and slinging allegations.
Yeah, that is so true. So on that, we kind of ran a little long. Anything else you want to hit before we wrap it up?
No, I think we really went wall to wall tonight.
Yeah, it was a good conversation. I'm sure Alex will probably put links on his thing, but can you tell people more about how to find you, to get more information and to follow your social media stuff? Where can they find you? Definitely.
So Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You can find me at The Father's Rights Attorney. Primarily Facebook and YouTube right now. Facebook and Instagram right now. YouTube in the next couple of weeks is going to get hot.
Nice.
And then my website, www.realfathersrights.com, REEL fathersrights.com. If you're in Southern California, you can reach out. And then every single Thursday night on the Father's Rights Movement Facebook and YouTube page, I host State of the Family Courts. This week, we actually are going to do 2 episodes. We'll have an episode Monday. We're going to be talking about constitutional arguments in family court. And then we'll have our regularly scheduled program, 5 p.m. Pacific at 8 Eastern on Thursday.
Awesome, Mark. Hey, man, it's great chatting with you. I'm glad Alex pulled this together. And thanks for all the information, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have to do this again.
Absolutely. All right. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.